The 14th Amendment is not about narrow partisan advantage. It goes to the core of what this republic is. This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I would like to welcome you to Fair Game. In the most recent term of the U.S. Supreme Court, a 5-4 majority reaffirmed the right of people born in the USA to be citizens by virtue of birth, citing the 14th Amendment. Why did the majority say that? Well, on the first day of President Trump's second term, he issued an executive order declaring that children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants are not entitled to the protections of U.S. citizenship, which means they can be deported. The American Civil Liberties Union had been expecting Trump to go that way and filed suit within 2 hours. Birthright citizenship was part of the legacy of what is often called the second founding of the Republic following the Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln was worried that the results of the war, particularly the freedom of the slaves, would be eroded once the southern states returned to Congress. So he proposed the 13th Amendment, abolishing human slavery. Well, after his assassination, the leaders of the Republican Congress believed that the next step was to ensure that virtually every person born in the United States would be a citizen. And you just might ask yourself the question, that seems fairly obvious. Why would it be necessary to have a constitutional amendment saying that? Well, you have to go back to the year 1857 when the Supreme Court issued its infamous Dred Scott decision. An enslaved person named Dred Scott was taken from Missouri, which was a slave state, to Illinois, which was a free state. By virtue of moving from the slave state to the free state, Dred Scott believed that he was entitled to his freedom. The case worked its way up to the Supreme Court, headed by a mean little man named Roger Brooke Taney. And Taney's court decided that Negroes, as African Americans were referred to in that time, he said, a Negro is not and can never be a citizen of the United States of America. That was settled case law in 1857. So the only way to resolve that problem was for the Congress to take action to declare that the former slaves were in fact citizens of the United States. So that's the first and most important reason for the amendment. The second reason for the 14th Amendment lay in the fear that the Republican leadership had that the southern states would try to turn back the clock once they were readmitted to the Union, that they would try to re-enslave the newly freed African Americans. Number 3, there was the vulnerability of the recently freed slaves. It may be hard to believe 160 years later, and especially given the devastating defeat that the seceded states experienced. But within months of General Lee's surrender at Appomattox, Southern legislatures started to enact black codes that sharply restricted the rights of newly freed enslaved people. And so there was a feeling that inasmuch as Appomattox had pretty well settled the issue of the superiority of the federal government over states, that the federal was going to have to step in on this issue and define the situation for once and all. That's how we got the 14th Amendment. Well, it was tested from time to time in the 1880s and 90s. Interestingly enough, not about African Americans. Mostly it was about the Chinese. Chinese were brought to America to work in the mines, to work on railroads, and hardly any community in the West was without a Chinese neighborhood or ghetto. And there were those who argued that the 14th Amendment only applied to the freed enslaved persons and their children. Did it apply to Chinese who were born here? Wong Kim Ark was the child of Chinese immigrants. He was born in San Francisco and had gone back to China for a period of time. He was denied re-entry to the United States after that trip under a marvelous piece of legislation called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Folks, you can't make this stuff up. The Chinese Exclusion Act banned virtually all Chinese immigration to the United States and prohibited Chinese immigrants from becoming naturalized U.S. citizens. Wong Kim Ark filed suit challenging that law and its constitutionality. To its everlasting credit, the Supreme Court determined that Wong Kim Ark, who was the child of immigrants, was in point of fact a citizen of the United States because he was born here. That interpretation has held for 130 years until Donald J. Trump challenged it. He has challenged it for decades. Now, it isn't precisely clear to me who gets to be a citizen of the United States of Donald Trump's America. But we can be fairly certain that Donald Trump ignores the clear meaning of the 14th Amendment. And that is what the ACLU challenged in federal court. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance has assured us that it wasn't really a 5-4 vote. It was, in fact, perhaps a 5.5 to 4.5 vote, and that if they'll just keep passing laws and issuing executive orders, that this will swing their way. I sure hope not. Because the 14th Amendment is not about narrow partisan advantage. It goes to the core of what this republic is. And this is a republic where everyone born in this country and who agrees to live under its laws is a citizen, even if the President of the United States does not believe they are. This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I want to thank you for joining us today for Fair Game.